Good morning. Today we're looking at the failures, the fainting in Ringeck's gloss. There are a couple we're going to look at today, and then there's a follow-up that I find Ringeck's description kind of confusing, so we're actually going to look at the Danzig and Liu descriptions because they agree with each other, and I think they're a little bit more straightforward. But let's get started on the first one. The Zettel is pretty short. It says, "Failure leads weapons well, it touches from below his plan." And here is the gloss for this first technique, which is also pretty short. "All fencers who like to parry will be misled and struck with the failure. Perform the technique like this. When you approach him on guard, do as if you want to strike him with a free or thwart hew to his left side of the head. Jerk your sword away with the hew and strike him with the thwart to the lower opening of his right side, as is pictured hereafter, so he is touched and struck below as planned." So the motion is pretty simple, and I'm going to show that in a second, but I think there are a couple good kind of strategic keys in this one. The first thing is that fencers who like to parry will be misled. This is important with feinting where you're not making an initial contact. If you're going to fake and hit to another area, you need to make sure that your opponent is chasing your sword and not trying to countercut you or something like that. Because if you feint and pull in range, you're going to get smacked in the face. So you want to make sure that the person is committed to defense. I also like to talk a lot about I commit the weapon, and if I see that then I come in. So we talk about committing the weapon, then the body. It's very important with feinting because if you step in with the body and feint in range, you might hit them, but you're probably going to get doubled if they stuff you in the face. So that fencers who like to parry point, it's very important. It's subtle, but it's an important point to make, is that you want to make sure that the opponent is kind of committed to a defense that's not threatening you before you commit to misdirection without contact. The other piece is that the fencer in KDF is divided into the 4 openings, and we're being told to attack and then strike kind of opposite quarters. So we're going from a high right to a low left, and that is a good thing that we can use in many different scenarios. So the technique that's being described is throwing an overcut or a thwart. It doesn't really matter, but we're threatening this high onside, and then we're striking to the low offside. We want to do this with high hands to keep us safe. So try not to come in and do this where you're not protecting your head. So just make sure that we're committing the sword, and then we're striking that lower opening. And in this case, the low opening is still a really hip line and above. So if I look at my pel where I have my temple and my midline targets, I'm going to threaten high and then hit low, but my hands are still high, and I'm still shuffling out a little bit so that I'm stacking my body on the outside of my weapon. And the nice thing is that I can do this threatening and then striking opposite quarters in a bunch of different ways. So I can throw a high offside, and then with the back edge thwart, hit the low onside, and I'm still keeping my high hands, and I'm still kind of floating out to one side. We also see in other places where I throw a low onside and roll into that high offside. And again, my body's on this outside. So if you're just getting into misdirecting, failing, think about kind of attacking and then striking opposite quarters. I think that's a good way to do it. It's also a pretty natural motion, but try to keep in mind that committing the sword then the body, it's very important if you're having those non-contact misdirections, and think about threatening and then striking the opposite quarters. The next one is, like I said, the initial motion is pretty straightforward, and then the follow-up is a little confusing, and so we're going to look at the Danzig version, but let me tell you what it says. So the failure twofold: one connects, make with the slice; twofold, it continues, step in left and do not be lazy. That's the Zettel. So Ringeck's gloss for the first part. And this is called the twofold failure because the man shall perform 2 deceptions from it while on guard. Perform the first like this. When you approach him on guard, jump with the right foot against him and do as if you want to strike him with a thwart to his left side, to the head, and jerk and strike away and strike him to his right side to the head as is pictured. So the first part, very simple. We're just going to do 2 thwart cuts, onside, offside. Easy enough. Onside, offside. So we're faking with the high thwart, and this one in some ways is a little bit safer just because it's pretty easy to stay covered in case the opponent does decide to, rather than commit to a defense that doesn't threaten us, maybe they just spaz and throw. We come in with the thwart, we're a little bit better protected, but if they do commit to that defense and they're chasing our sword, makes it very easy to just come right around because we've set up a helicopter of death fake kind of situation. Now the follow-up is a little weird, which is why we're going to look at Danzig's description instead. And here's what the Danzig has to say. If he parries and you make contact with the sword, jump to the same side next to him away and slice him with the short edge behind his sword with the duplication into the mouth. So here's what we're doing. And this is actually something I use in sparring quite a bit. So we're going to come fake with the thwart, strike the next thwart, and then we're going to double behind to hit them with the back edge in the mouth. I actually like this duplier more than doing it from an onside attack because I get to wind to uncrossed hands, which I find a little bit safer and more natural, a little bit easier to maintain the pressure. So when we're doing this on the Pell, we're still fake hit, and then we're just doing a pretty tight wind so that our back edge is coming into our opponent's, they say the mouth, but as long as you hit them in the head, you're fine. So just remember, fake hit, and that short little duplier and hit them from behind. I really like this one. I will do this in sparring quite a bit, even making contact with both thwarts, because if I can get my opponent to start panicking and parrying, again, in this kind of side-to-side way that's not threatening me, they kind of have a built-in pressure there that makes the duplier very easy. So this is definitely a good thing to practice. So I would say play with those, play with the failing to opposing quarters. Keep in mind that you want to make sure that you're committing your sword then your body. Play with the double thwart up high. Play with the duplier off of that offside committed thwart so that you're winding into the uncrossed position. That's a lot. And see what happens. Message me if you have questions, and we'll try something else next week.